Justin Starbird, I'm the president and CEO of the Aebli Group. We're a full-service marketing agency specializing in MedTech, manufacturing, and crowdfunding. Hiten Sonpal is the CEO of RISE Robotics, which is overseeing the electrification of hydraulics. And you've had an entire career of doing incredible things. First at iRobot, where you led the delivery of millions of units and billions of dollars in revenue. You took this role as CEO of RISE a couple years ago, and most recently are famous for two things. One, the largest crowdfunding campaign in 2025, and a Guinness World Record for lifting the most amount of weight with a robotic arm, which is very exciting. So talk a little bit about your career and what got you here today.
Sure, and thank you for inviting me to attend this and talk about our success last year. As Justin mentioned, I've spent most of my life in robotics. I spent a fair amount of time at iRobot, where teams that I led shipped or generated over $2 billion in revenue, shipped over 9 million units across 20 products. And I joined RISE Robotics to do the same. Before I joined, the company was a pre-product company. We had contracts with the Department of Defense. And then my charter was to take the company from there to commercialization and scale. And last year we were able to add our first commercial customer. So it was an exciting milestone for us. And then, as Justin mentioned, we also broke the Guinness World Record for lifting, for a robotic arm, lifting for the most powerful robotic arm in the world.
And looking around the halls today, robotic arms are, definitely well featured. So what does that feel like to be the strongest guy in the room?
That's funny. Yes, certainly in manufacturing, robotic arms have become pervasive. People talk about humanoid robots all the time, but 99% of the robots that you see are picking and placing and moving things, and robotic arms are part of that workflow, much more so than I think humanoid robots will ever be.
Yeah. Well, today is kind of cool because we're going to talk a little bit about funding and challenges, what you've seen from your experience in a couple of different places. So, just to level set the agenda today for everybody, what we want to talk about, of course, are the challenges, and specifically about crowdfunding as an alternative, and then what crowdfunding is not, an overview of actually defining what it is, a great case study in using your company, RISE Robotics, and the success you had this year, or last year and into this year. And then what are the most important steps and things to avoid? And then, for those of you that are looking to get started, where do you begin? So that's what I want to cover today is really, initially we're in an event today with, combines manufacturing, MedTech, certainly engineering, packaging, and there are challenges in the current landscape to traditional funding. Generally speaking, it's 3 to 7 years in terms of being able to realize a product and a new innovation. It's not necessarily at terms that you actually want. And then, speaking of MedTech specifically, there are complexities with regulations and those things. What was that experience like for you in terms of looking at opportunities for funding, both when you joined RISE, and that was kind of your charter, as you mentioned, and then in previous stops?
Yeah, so before I joined RISE Robotics, I was president of a company in the San Jose area, in the Bay Area, called Electric Sheep Robotics. And I left because the company had challenges raising their Series B. And this was in the 2022 timeframe where sort of VC winter hit, where investors weren't really getting returns because there weren't that many IPOs, and so money wasn't circulating back into the market. And that has pretty much stayed constant since then. So it's been a difficult environment for companies raising money, especially if you don't have a story that's, we're going to do a hockey stick tomorrow. If you don't have that story, folks don't really want to invest. So VCs are looking and have always been looking for fast growth and large TAM. And for a lot of companies, you get one or both, and getting both has been difficult. And when that happens, the VCs that are willing to fund those deals have a lot of options. And so they really offer bad terms. They want a large piece of your company for very little money. And if you've raised previous rounds from previous investors, those investors are going to be at a serious disadvantage. When I joined RISE Robotics, the board had asked me informed me that as part of the role, I'd have to raise money. And I felt very comfortable with that. But as I approached VCs, I found out very quickly that they were not willing to give terms that were respectful of the existing investors. So we started looking at other alternatives. And that's kind of how we started the process of saying, okay, well, maybe we should look at crowdfunding because other companies are having success at it.
Yeah, especially if you're not every company right now implements AI, but if you're not an AI-centric company, it's a lot more difficult to prove that the hockey stick, as you mentioned. Looking at the crowd, are any of you right now going through opportunities to raise money or looking at that as your next step? All right, good deal. Well, then you know what the traditional VCs want, and you're part of that winter right now. We're from the Northeast, so it's a lot warmer here today anyway, so we'll take it. Generally speaking, innovation is always ahead of that hockey stick or that funding as well. Let's take a step back, though, and say what crowdfunding is not. And a lot of the misconceptions about crowdfunding is that you're going to ask the church for your, a Kickstarter campaign, and will you donate to our cause? And the reality is, crowdfunding is actually governed by the SEC. It's got its own, regulations for it. They are real raises with real returns. So you mentioned that previously you were looking at other VCs or other traditional funding, and they weren't giving favorable terms to you, and it was diluting the previous investors. Talk a little bit about that, and what is that? What are they trying to do? Why are they trying to ice them out?
Yeah, so before I get into that, maybe I'll touch into the Kickstarter thing just to sort of contrast the difference. In Kickstarter, you're promising your customers a product, and then you're basically getting prepayment for that product, and you're funding the development of that product through prepayment. In crowdfunding, you are actually giving your investors equity, because sometimes the products you're building are not things that consumers might want or could afford. Like, let's say you decide that you want to be a car company and you want to crowdfund. If you set the bar at, you need to give me $30,000 before I send you a car, that's a very high barrier for a lot of folks. So what crowdfunding allows you to do is, instead of making a promise for a future product, you give them equity in the company. And then that brings me to your question, which is, when money is tight, then VCs have the power. I'd say 3 years ago, in 2021, founders had the power. So if you were raising money in 2021, it was possible for you to get insane valuations because money was cheap. And then all of a sudden, the cash flow cycle stopped because IPO stopped. And that's why it became a buyer's market as opposed to a seller's market. And that's why VCs felt comfortable saying, okay, I've got 3 good deals. If you want me to invest in your company, then you need to give me a better deal than those other deals. And those founders are willing to do whatever it takes to get my money. Are you willing to do the same?
Have you seen that change at all recently? You mentioned it's been, sort of the funding winter since 2022. Have you seen that loosened at all?
I don't think so. I think there are some IPOs coming. And when IPOs happen, then the investors get some liquidity and then they can go back and invest. But I think it's going to be some time before that changes.
You mentioned off stage a little bit about, say, the Tesla and, the merge of what was it, AX and then XI, whatever it is, and then SpaceX together, and the IPO would be at 1.5 trillion or some absurd number. And you mentioned that the money's already made at that point. So who's there to buy stock, or who's there to fund it? Talk a little bit about what those IPOs would look like.
Yeah, exactly. So the other half of the opportunity, one is that founders that are looking to raise money are getting bad terms. But on the flip side, retail investors that are looking to find deals are finding it harder and harder to get deals. And as Justin mentioned, if you think about SpaceX, the talk is that they're going to IPO at $1.5 trillion. Well, if you buy stock in a company at $1.5 trillion, how are you ever going to make money on it? Well, the money has already been made, right? If you had found a way to get into SpaceX 10 years ago, when they were starting to get their contracts, starting to commercialize, that's when the money was going to be made. So the opportunity for retail investors today, before the PE firms come in and before large venture firms come in and try to take a stake of the company, is to come in right when companies are commercializing. So the stage when VCs typically don't want to invest in companies because they're like, well, you're almost there. Why don't you cross this quote-unquote valley of death, productize, and then we'll invest in you. That's actually the window of opportunity for retail investors to come in, because that's where most of the value gets created.
You've essentially defined crowdfunding already, but really it's the method in which individuals pool small amounts of money from a large audience to support a project or a deal. And it doesn't have to be small to be a community round, right? I mean, that's another misnomer. And I like what you said about the valley of death, because one of the things that PE firms or VCs want to do is invest in deals that are de-risked. And so crowdfunding is now going from a negative, I can't get money, so I'm going to go get to the community, to being a proving ground, if you will, for VCs to say, you have 2,500 investors that believe in what you're doing. Now we're going to start to pay attention. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, that's absolutely correct. And as you said, VCs like to de-risk by investing a little bit of money in a lot of companies. So that's their de-risking model. And PE firms are trying to de-risk by seeing your EBITDA and the trailing metrics. And then somewhere in between of those is the valley of death, where where a VC firm investing in you can't really diversify substantially because you need a lot of money, or you need money at a high valuation. And on the flip side, you haven't quite built the traction and the EBITDA that a PE firm would like to invest. And so when you take the crowdfunding route, you get a couple of options. One, yes, you do attract the attention of VCs. We had 2 firms invest in us simply because we started a crowdfunding round. And then, as a next stage to crowdfunding, you can actually do what is called a Regulation A+, where you're able to start trading your company over the counter and bring in an even larger base of retail investors. And we can get into that in a bit.
Yeah, well, and Reg D is in there as well, which allows you to take accredited investors off of the platform, or even on the platform in some cases, and also take higher amounts. And again, going back to the idea that crowdfunding is no longer a negative in the eyes of VCs or private equity groups. Some people used to call it a tax. And what we found, and I say we because we've worked with you for a while on this, is it's actually become a competitive advantage. And there are opportunities now where investment in crowdfunding jumped last year 58% between the Reg A+ and crowdfunding, Reg CF. Year over year, crowdfunding was up over 11%, even though the total number of deals was actually down something like 15 or 20%. So total number of deals went down, but amount raised went up. There were over 100, I believe it was 100 companies that raised over $1 million. 9 of them raised to the maximum of $5 million in a calendar year, one of which and the most of which was RISE.
Yeah, that's right. As you mentioned, it has turned into a competitive advantage. For us, what we found is that our investor base has turned into our champions and even into salespeople. So we have over 2,500 investors. We have the largest sales force of any company in Massachusetts. We can reach out to them for help. We've had folks connect us to other investors. We've had folks connect us to potential customers. We've had folks retweet and create awareness about us. So it's been really exciting to have that as a competitive advantage. And to Justin's point about deals, the fact that there are bigger and fewer deals means that the bad deals are really out of the market, more so than they were before. Rather than having many companies that are raising little bits, there are some strong offerings coming to play where retail investors will become more and more savvy and are starting to look at the documentation that you're filing with the SEC, looking at your debt, looking at your earnings, looking at your projections. That has really turned into crowdfunding being more and more a real thing than it used to be in the past. One example is a company called Mercury. They provide banking services to startups. They raised a $125 million round with A2Z, which is one of the premier capital VC firms in the Bay Area. And after they raised the $125 million, they extended that round to their customers who also wanted to participate because the Mercury product was so good. And they raised another $5 million in a couple of days. And so we're seeing more and more of this happen where folks are raising a round from VCs and then opening it up to either their customers or to the public and seeing fantastic results.
I mean, I know why you'd want to do that in terms of like looking at it from the chance to open it to the community, because it gives those engineers, those people that see the idea, or the scientists, clinicians, doctors that may not otherwise have, nurses that especially here in MedTech, may not have the opportunity to invest in these IPO companies. And now, to your point, they become evangelists because they get to go to Thanksgiving or Christmas or birthdays and say, holy smokes, I just invested in this and I feel great. I mean, with RISE, it's unique because you're really electrifying heavy machinery and what that means is they've figured out, we haven't talked about what RISE actually does. It is so neat because they take the hydraulic cylinder and replace it without using oil. So they've come up with technology to be able to do that. So when you think about creating efficient, green, electric, heavy excavators, et cetera, that last bit of the piece that's not possible to be environmentally friendly is now capable of that. And you're proving that you can do that at heavy weight. So I know we're taking a little bit of a step back, but it's such a neat company and mission driven.
That's right. We're a B2B company, which you would think would be difficult to raise money in crowdfunding, but we've had a lot of success. And we're also targeting the industrial space and the military space. Not very consumer at all, but our messaging has resonated. Our product, of course, is disruptive. We built a replacement for hydraulics technology that's 3 times as fast, 3 times as efficient, 3 times as durable, enables autonomy right out of the box. So those things all resonated with our retail investors. But I'll say this about, talk at the dinner table. We've had a couple of investors call us and say, hey, I know you have an open house. So we started doing open houses so our retail investors could come see our facility and see what we were working on. And so someone called me and said, hey, can I bring my family? I said, of course, bring whoever you want. And the gentleman was like, oh, can I bring my neighbor too? Yes, please bring your neighbor. We'd love for them to invest as well. So it's kind of infectious, and people are proud to talk about their investments. They come in and they tell me they've invested in the company when we do these open houses, and then I get a chance to connect with them. One thing that's interesting is that many of our investors, and this is true for crowdfunding, are professionals, white-collar professionals, and even though we're sort of engineering heavy, we have a lot of people from the medical profession investing in our company simply because they have the wherewithal. And I think what that means for this group in particular is that if you choose to go the crowdfunding route, there are other people in the medtech space, in healthcare, that will want to invest, and you will have a pool of investors that are willing to look at your offering and express interest. So I think that it's something that companies in medtech should definitely consider.
Yeah, last year, 2025, on the last slide, I think it showed $938 or $958 million raised in total on Reg CF or Reg A+. So the community round element across all industries. When you break healthcare, medtech, biotech, life sciences out, it was almost 12% of that was raised in those industry specific. When you transportation, logistics, heavy machinery, engineering, focused products were 15 to 20% of that, depending on how many verticals you bring into it. So that was really exciting. So you mentioned the pivotal moments, or the way in which you included your community. We've got a slide here. You did a couple things over the course of the raise that was pretty unique in giving the opportunity to those investors to come get a behind-the-scenes tour. Because at the end of the day, I mean, if we're going to be honest, PE and VC groups, they feel special because they get to go walk the show floors or get a behind-the-scenes tour. But Mike, cousin Dave doesn't, but you give him that opportunity. And there were a couple of perks that you created that allowed others to come in and actually be a part of this. So I have here, actually, so you mentioned the kids. That is my daughter that got to come witness this, historic moment for the Guinness record. Talk a little bit about some of those things that you did.
Yeah, so to make sure that we're engaging our community, we certainly are keeping track of everything that we're doing and finding a way to get it out there. So we've partnered with you to help us with all of our social media content. You also helped us build a group of followers, which actually led us to consider crowdfunding. If we didn't have 1,500 followers that you had helped us build through our marketing strategy, we wouldn't have started with such a strong wind behind our backs. So that was a key part of our strategy. But then after that, to keep those folks engaged, we continued to provide updates over social media so folks could see what was happening. I had to start pushing the engineers to start recording the work that they were doing, including when a big test is coming up or if we're getting ready for a show, let's take a video, let's cut out the essential clips, let's show to our investors that we're actually hustling and that we're actually putting their money to good use. So we started doing that. And then we started doing open houses. And certainly one of them was the celebration for winning the Guinness World Record. We had a representative come in, give us a certificate, and we opened it to all of our investors and anyone in our network that wanted to come and attend. So it was a fantastic moment. And I'm so glad that you brought your family.
It was great. And for the adults, if you look in the back there is a Guinness trailer, because of course it's, Boston and, Guinness World Record, and they served Guinness. So applying that to this show, MedTech and engineering, manufacturing, even packaging, generally speaking, most of the people here don't get accused of being extroverts or wanting to show off their work. And in MedTech, a lot of times you can't say a lot of stuff because of FDA rules and clearance and those sorts of things, and the ever-changing regulatory climate of our country at the moment. But that said, there are opportunities to talk about progress. And although it's a slightly different industry, what you just mentioned is one of those things that really gives a behind-the-scenes look into where their investment is going. And, crowdfunding, if anything, also gives those investors, even at $100, a voice to ask questions. What was some of the more surprising things that you got as feedback from those investors?
Yeah, so we've got a surprising number of people that are engaged. They reach out to us and ask us about sales. They ask us about other business prospects. Some of them ask us questions about the core technology. They ask us about technical risks. And I would say that, usually one investor doesn't cover all of those bases, but collectively, the group is very smart. Collectively, the questions that get asked are some of the hardest questions that we have had to answer. And it feels good knowing that the investors understand what they're getting into, what the risks are, what the challenges are, and the progress that we're making.
Thinking about the fact that you have a novel technology and that so many here also have things that are just starting to be protected by patents or pending patents, et cetera. Was there any fear opening up some of this information to those? Because I got to, imagine, especially in MedTech, that is some of the bigger fears, is that a big guy is going to swoop in and steal it.
Yeah, so we have a huge patent moat, and certainly we haven't spoken about anything that isn't yet patented. So we keep our trade secrets very tight, but as soon as the patent's done and we feel confident that the IP is protected, we want to go out and talk about it. I think that one of the things that's interesting, especially for this group, is that when it comes to medical devices or medicine in general, that resonates with the broader public. If you're building something that is going to heal someone, help somebody, there's going to be a large group out there that knows someone who could be helped by what you're building, and that will excite them to invest in what you're making. So talking about what you're making, especially the parts that aren't proprietary, aren't confidential, and aren't yet patented, or are patented, would make a lot of sense because it gets people excited about what's coming together.
I couldn't agree more. I think, especially in MedTech, the more that you can talk about, what you're actually doing and how it helps people. And you mentioned even that, you opened the community round and then launched your product. So it's not unheard of to be pre-revenue, pre-product to be able to do this. And then I want to get into some of the steps that you took. But what does that look like?
Yeah, I thought our timing was really good because as a hardware company, even before you're selling, there's so much activity happening. Like there's so much real stuff. You're building stuff, you're testing stuff, you're running pilots. So you have so much information to share. If you're a software company doing SaaS, it's a little harder to show and connect with customers what you're really building. Like they're just seeing an API, which you could have these days build over a weekend, right? So they don't really understand where the money's going. But when you're buying hardware, when big things are coming together, when they're seeing prototypes, that all leaves a mark.
You mentioned earlier talking about the founder story, or a little bit about creating a community before you launch. So I have here some of the 5 most important steps to consider before launching a community round. And by and large, not for anything, RISE sort of backed into some of this as well. When you think about a founder story or creating a pre-launch list, what does that mean?
Well, I think being intentional about your campaign is important, just like you're being intentional about the product that you're building. Product development has a series of steps. You have to think about a concept. You have to work on your technical risks. You have to address them. You have to test the product. You have to market it. So you have to do all of those things. And similarly with crowdfunding, you should have a process and a playbook by which to run it. And you guys are very familiar with this playbook and what needs to be done. And part of that is certainly putting together a process, which is listed here as a pre-launch list. Having a story, that's probably more important than on the product development side, but having a story about why this is the right team, why this is the right market, why your product is going to make an impact. Those things have to be put together. And with social media, you can't avoid making it visual. So that's point number 3 that's covered over there. And momentum is one thing that is important in crowdfunding that is probably not as important in other funding vehicles. So starting strong is important. If you can do what's called a testing the waters campaign, where you can see and dip your toe in the water and see how much interest there is, and then use that so that when you start, there's a lot of interest. If you can build up a base of followers like you helped us build, so that when you start, you got folks who are already ready to go as soon as you hit start, all of those things really help. And so when we started, our campaign started very strongly. We had a lead investor that put in a fair amount of money, which got the campaign going. But then at some point, the campaign started to slow down. And then we just kept running our playbook, getting out there, putting out social media, getting on podcasts, interviews. And eventually it started to pick up, and then the momentum built, and we just kept it going. And we ended up as the #1 fundraiser last year.
You make it sound so easy. 11 months of dedicated hard work to do that. And you're leading a unique team too. You kind of came into this, RISE is a 10, 11-year-old startup at this point, and you were leading, 4 very eccentric founders that had such unique and passionate backgrounds into what they were doing. So, thinking about crafting the founder story, crafting the brand story, crafting why the product is so important. What was that like to be able to finally pull that out of them and share that their work was so important to the progress of potentially so many industries?
Yeah, so part of making an assessment when I joined RISE as the new CEO was to look at the strengths that we had. And certainly we had a huge market that was interesting. And we also had founders that were very interesting. 3 of them went to school at MIT, and then 1 of them went to school at the Rhode Island School of Design. It's also a very good school. And so that story resonated. We had smart founders working on smart things. And then the problems we were trying to solve were also quality of life problems, including when you build anything that's more efficient, you end up reducing the cost of goods, which helps everyone out. If you build something that's cleaner, well, then you clean the air, you reduce the amount of hydraulic oil leaking into the earth. All of these things matter to people. So just taking all of those points and connecting those dots, and with your help, we were able to craft a very strong story and create a lot of momentum.
And the momentum you ended up capitalizing or using to capitalize was ads, and that was one thing where once you started to get investment, you were able to redeploy that not just in the work but also to amplify the message. How did you decide, the direction in terms of messaging and what you want? Again, going back to what you want to share and thinking about an industry like MedTech engineering, where you are today in heavy machinery and other spaces that doesn't necessarily like to talk about itself.
Yeah, as a former engineer, the thought of like going out and advertising our raise was initially very distasteful to me. I felt like we should be winning on the merits. But then, as we started to look at the metrics of the campaign, just looking at the data, we realized that roughly 2% of everyone that showed up to our website, our campaign page, made an investment. And so once you see that metric, you realize that it's not, yes, you can win on the merits, but you also have to bring the people in to see what you have to offer. So that's when we decided that we wanted to start marketing the fundraise, and we started to invest in ads. And it's actually had a dual impact. The marketing has also helped us land customers, because the message and the word of what we're doing has gotten out, and we have investors who've turned into customers and customers who've become investors. It's been very synergistic, much more so than I expected. So even though we aren't a consumer play, some of our suppliers have individuals who have invested in the company simply because they know what we're buying from them, they know what we're building, and so they're excited about us.
Not everything we did worked. As much as I'd like to sit here and say, hey, we created this playbook together, we executed it flawlessly, there were some things that did not go as planned. Now, these generally are some overviews of deals that have gone bad, not necessarily yours. You did not launch cold. Your valuation was pretty spot on. Actually, it's probably lower, which gave people a better deal. We had incredible assets in terms of video and visuals. Treating it, you didn't definitely have not treated this as a passive campaign. You have jumped in, cannonball right into it. When you think of the campaign that you executed, that we put together with you, what were some things that maybe didn't go exactly the way you were thinking?
Well, if you look at the item number 5 here, relying only on PR or ads, we made that mistake. We started initially with just PR, and we didn't think about ads. And so we had received advice that after a certain point, if we wanted to raise more than, say, $1 million, that we'd have to attract more folks to come look at our campaign than just our followers and just the folks on WeFunder, which was the platform we were using, that we had to go find people. And so I'd say that was something that we realized fairly late in the game. But the rest of it seems to have been pretty good, yeah.
But we've seen pretty closely, like you and I both have colleagues that have launched campaigns, not that we're involved in, but others, that have not necessarily gone as well as they could have. And often, in my opinion, and not just because you're up here and you're a friend of mine, but what we see as the single biggest differentiator between not successful crowdfunding campaigns and ones that are going to get successful in crowdfunding is generally when you hit $1 million. When you get over that, you become in rarefied air. So when you reach $1 million or more, generally the specific difference is how involved the leader of the company is and how much they're willing to get on the phone and talk to existing investors. Because what happens is they'll come to the page, they'll invest, like he said, 2 out of 100, or when we have a great week, it's 8 out of 100 will actually invest in the campaign when they land on the page. And the difference is that the leader will then pick up the phone and say thank you. And that thank you turns into, would you like to double down? or you're so close to this extra, either more shares or bonus shares or some other perk, an opportunity to get a behind-the-scenes tour of the facility. And what we see, that one change or the ability of the leader to go in and actually do that is one of the biggest contributors to a successful campaign versus a not.
Yeah, thank you for that. I was fortunate that I had a good team at RISE, and so I was able to spend a lot of my focus on running the crowdfunding campaign. It definitely is 3/4 of a full-time job. Like, you have to put that much time into it. You have to make sure that the message is resonating. You have to look over the copy that's being produced to just make sure that it's technically accurate. You have to make sure that you're not making any claims that you can't really back up. Like, you just have to be very mindful of the communication and how the company is being positioned. And that does take a fair amount of time. And so, yes, I ended up spending the vast majority of my time on this, which is not something that people like to hear that are crowdfunding. They think that it's just going to work passively, and it doesn't quite work that way. So it does take effort, but raising money from VCs also takes effort, right? Ultimately, it's a numbers game. You could talk to 100 VCs, and 99 of them would say no, and maybe you hit that one. I know for a fact that if I talk to 10 retail investors, one of them will say yes, it'll be a smaller check, but I keep making progress, and the business keeps moving forward.
And to your point earlier, they become evangelists, and then could lead you elsewhere, right? It's 7 degrees of Kevin Bacon. We are near Hollywood, right? So if somebody wanted to get started, there are a number of different platforms out there: WeFunder, Start Engine, Dealmaker, Republic, and they all have some variances in terms of what they require or how to get up and going. But this is kind of the checklist of what to do to get started. And you chose WeFunder over others. Why was that?
Well, they were number one in Reg CF fundraisers, so it was an easy decision. But the second piece was that all the people we met there were very nice, and so we knew that we could work with them, and if we ran into trouble, they'd help us out, and they did, and that has turned out to be true. So it's not just about the metrics, but also kind of what your heart is telling you about the people you're working with.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. They are a really great team. They consider themselves running a flat structure, so you can talk to the president one day and the newest hire the next, and they're all equal. They're all really, really passionate about what they're doing. But going back to what we're talking about today, also some of the things that that you did prior to your raise were, of course, creating that list, that launch, a narrative. You also partnered with experts, and I don't just mean TAG. We've been a partner for RISE for a number of years now. It's been a little bit of a different relationship in that we do a lot of the execution on marketing and communications for RISE, but you also brought in a consulting group, capital department, and they offered a little bit of a different perspective. What was that like?
Well, Steve Jobs has a quote that's stuck with me for a long time. He said, here at Apple, we don't hire people to tell them what to do. We hire people who can tell us what we need to do. And so that stuck with me. And so as part of this journey, I keep looking for folks who can tell me what I need to do to make this thing successful. And so we've ended up hiring a couple of agencies, Capital Department being one of them, that have helped us through this process because they've done it before. There's no point in me learning for the first time how to do this. I'm trying to make RISE successful, not learn how to be, a crowdfunding expert and coach, right? So we got someone who could coach us through the process.
And then what was it like in terms of actually going through that process of, there is an element of audits that happen, and there are some mechanics that go into going live. So you make this decision, hey, I'm going to open this up to my community, and it's one of those things where you're like, if I build it, they'll come, right? We've learned the hard way in some instances that wasn't the case, but there are some legalese too that you have to go through. Talk a little bit about what that experience has been like.
Yeah, the first part was definitely filled with some trepidation because starting a campaign like this does take money. If you do bring in an expert that can help you run the campaign, you're going to be paying them a retainer. It's going to be expensive. You need to have some budget for it. And then the second part of that is as you go through the legal proceedings and the audits. Now, RISE has been around for a long time, so the paperwork and describing what we had done in previous rounds and working through attorneys and so on was going to be an expensive process. And then on top of that, the SEC has some requirements, and so you have to work through those. And depending on how much you want to raise, you have to put in money to get a financial review or a financial audit, which is also going to cost money. Now, if your company is new, has only been around for a year or so, that process is going to be easy because you won't have a lot of data in your books that has to be reviewed. Your accounts won't have huge histories, right? So it'll all be simple. But there was definitely this nail-biting period where I thought, okay, I'm spending all this money. Will there be a return? But I just had to trust the process, and that I was willing to put in, and trust that I was willing to put in the effort, and that I had the right kind of partners to help me be successful.
Yeah. Well, it's been an incredible year working with you. I know that, we feel fortunate to have had the opportunity to be a part of this, process with you. It's certainly given us exposure to a lot more elements, a lot more things, and it's a lot of fun. You have a great business. I mean, similarly, you're fun to work with. It's not just partners. You talk about WeFunder having good people. You do too, and we feel very fortunate to have been a part of that. So thank you so much for joining me for this today. And before that, you have a couple of things coming up within RISE. You want to talk a little bit about what your next 3 to 6 months look like as well?
Sure. So since we've maxed out this round and there seems to be appetite for more investors to come in, what we're doing next is we're opening a follow-on Reg CF round. This time, however, we think it's important that we raise the price of the stock because the folks that came in early and trusted us early deserve to see some appreciation in value. So we're going to be doing that. But we'll do a second round here shortly. And then we haven't announced this broadly, but we landed our second commercial customer, and so we'll be announcing that. And then we were awarded a $3 million contract from the Department of Defense, and so we'll be executing that this year. So a lot of exciting things coming RISE's way.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, congratulations on that. If you'd like to connect with either of us, by all means, go ahead. And then for that, I'll open it up for questions.
On a practical side of things in the medical device industry, eventually you're looking, say, to be acquired. And so one has to be worried about, what this crowdfunding will look like. So would you come in, say, early on? Would this be a seed round? And associated with that, a seed round or a Series A, whatever. But then associated with that, you have to worry about your cap table. And if you're going to be acquired, you want to have as small a cap table as possible. And so would you place this crowdfunding into, say, an SPV or something like that then?
I'll take it?
Yeah, I mean...
Yeah, so you're absolutely right that it used to be the case that if you did crowdfunding, you'd end up with the cap table with thousands and thousands of investors. Hundreds and hundreds of investors. And
hopefully thousands and
hopefully thousands. Yeah, but everyone's gotten a lot more sophisticated now, and the process is exactly as you described. An SPV is created by WeFunder, or the platform that you're working with, and all the investors come into that SPV, which is an LLC, and all the investors own a piece of that SPV, and then that SPV is the single entity that owns the number of shares that you're issuing. So your cap table is very clean. And then in terms of what round, really you can raise money in crowdfunding using any instrument that you're using with the VC. You can raise it as debt, you can raise it as convertible debt, as SAFE, and you can raise it as equity. So we chose equity because our rounds had already been priced before. We had institutional investors. But if you don't have a priced round, you can raise it as a SAFE just like you would from any other angel investor.
We've seen we have a deal right now that's a loan as well, so that gets paid back, so the investors get paid back also. So there's a number of ways to go about it, and in terms of if you do it before a seed or you do it before a Series A, I mean, generally that's, again, going back to some of the previous comments about it, this helps de-risk the deal for future investors, especially if you're able to get hundreds or, in Rise's case, thousands of folks to participate?
I actually have two questions. The first one is, I've been following RISE for a while, so there's a lot of good companies out there, just like RISE, trying to raise funds. So first question is, how important is it to know the who's who in the funding world, like the Khoslas, the Founders Fund, and the SoftBank people in the Bay Area? Because I see a lot of companies, even in El Segundo, for example, with no product, first round, 250 million raised, 700 million raised, right? So that's my first question. How important is it? How meritocratic is the fundraising ecosystem, so to speak? Second question is, you mentioned virality when you're raising funds, right? The videos, the PR campaigns. So with the rise of all these AI agents like Claudebot, OpenClaw, where they are creating autonomous agents that are going to Reddit and skewing the algorithm in their favor, right? How important is organic marketing still in the world of the future, where they have raised $8 million in Solana cryptocurrency platform, autonomous agents in the last 3 days, with no humans present, right? So, just two questions in general.
Yeah. So to answer your first question, I don't think that fundraising in general is purely merit-based. In fact, it's very hard to, because we're human, it's very hard to find any systems that are purely merit-based, even if they aspire to be that way 100%. Coming to the United States as an immigrant, my thought is that the system here in general is very merit-based, but relatively speaking, but you can always find areas where you need to know someone, because ultimately people have to trust you, right? So if you are a second-time founder, if you had one exit, you can take an idea and go back to the people that you made money for and say, I want to do this next thing, and they will write you a check, right? Because you have credibility. Or if you've done that, if you've been successful or worked for someone that's now in the VC world, and you had a really high work ethic and you had high integrity and they knew you as a person, and then you reached out to them and said, hey, can you invest in my company? Well, that's a completely different dynamic than you or I reaching out to them and saying, invest in me, right? So some of what we see on the outside probably has a much more richer story that's still merit-based, but we can't necessarily see it. And then in terms of AI agents, I don't know how that's going to play out. Maybe Justin has a better take on this. For us, the organic marketing has worked and has worked well.
Yeah, I don't disagree that there are opportunities for agents to participate in this and help grow its grow the understanding of what the deal is. A person still has to write the check. So somewhere you still have to resonate with the person writing the check to participate. We've been very successful with crowdfunding specifically, where it's mission driven. Being authentic has been the most important part of all this. Going back and seeing those pictures of the F-150 up on the robotic arm, seeing my daughter was not the only kid there that day to see this all take place. That she came home and went to school and talked about what she did that day, and it wasn't just get out of school early. So those were still elements that. How much money did it turn into? I don't know. Sometimes we could say, hey, that event we got $10,000 new out of it. Others were $100,000, right? And then with the Guinness thing, based on that, I mean, it's we can attribute a real number to investing in those events. And the story of AI and what it is capable of doing, of course it's some of it's nefarious, right? And you're trying to weed that out. At the end of the day, you're still, in my opinion, you're still trying to talk to a person to get them to feel something, especially in MedTech. Like, what are you solving for? What affliction are you helping overcome? What are you doing to help improve or save somebody's life? In this case, where you're making a job that's been historically dangerous or bad for the environment safer and more efficient, and there is actually AI built in, or they're all ready for AI. So all that though does create a message that amplifies that mission, that pulls at the heartstrings, that then opens somebody's wallet and says, here's a check.
Yeah, I really, sometimes there are pitch contests where you can go and pitch live and it gets streamed to folks that are looking for crowdfunding investments. And I really dislike when I'm pitching against MedTech and companies in healthcare because, sure, I'm going to clean up the planet, we're going to make things cheaper and efficient and so on and so forth. But it's very hard to compete with someone that has a cancer drug, and there are people who know people who've had cancer, and so I can't win those contests, but a rising tide lifts all boats.
Yeah, there's an opportunity for everybody to win there, I think. So, any other questions? Thank you all for joining. If you'd like to connect with us on LinkedIn or connect with either of the companies, by all means, please do.
Thank you.
One last round of applause. Thanks, gentlemen.